family and friends, welcome back to my YouTube channel. It's your girl Nthabiseng Mabuya, back with another episode of the APC series. So if you are a returning subscriber, thank you so much for the love and the support that you have shown me. We are currently at 900 plus subscribers and just a few subscribers away from the hashtag 1K subscribers. So if you do know friends who are currently pursuing this APC journey, please kindly share the content with them so we can help as many people as possible. And if you are a first-time visitor on this channel, I hope that you are here to stay, and I hope that you're gonna go back to the other episodes in this series because you do not want to miss out, especially when it comes to how to do effective research and the websites that I share with you to help you, try to just bring everything together when you're doing APC research so that you don't go into this wormhole that I, experienced when I was doing my research. So I hope that you are just, familiarizing yourself with the content, and welcome home, man. So you know how we do it. If you have any questions for me, please just drop them in the comment section. And if you want a one-on-one interaction, you can send me an email. But I always like to say, please start in the comment section with your question so that I can answer it and the next candidate can see how I responded to you. Just in case that there's someone who has the same question as you, and we can help people collectively. But you can still send me an email on apcplug101@gmail.com. However, I have a disclaimer, right? I'm receiving a high volume of emails from APC candidates, especially at this time of the year. We are in October. We're only a few months away from the big boss, the big giants in December. So you can just imagine the high volume of emails I'm receiving. So I will get to your email. I try to answer them in batches because they are, that large. So just be patient with me, and thank you so much for just interacting. And also I love interacting with you guys, so just make sure that you are keeping the questions coming and I can help you guys to the best of my ability. So yes, that's where we are on the APC journey. But today I decided to make a video on the same question I've been receiving via email. So students have been asking, or candidates rather, you guys are not students, candidates have been asking me the same question, and this is the question of cheat sheets, right? So they've been asking what cheat sheets that I have in my file, or if I can share my cheat sheets, because I did mention the cheat sheets in the APC file preparation video, and I see that this question has been coming up a lot. So I decided to dedicate this episode on the list of cheat sheets I have. But the thing with APC, right? It's really not a one-size-fits-all. And I did mention this in the APC file preparation video as well, that you need to prepare your file according to your needs and according to, what you want to put in it. You need to personalize everything. And even when I'm responding to the emails, I'm always saying that when it comes to templates, you need to personalize your own template, because yes, someone can give you a template and say, hey, use it. But then what good is there to use someone else's template when you don't know their thought process? You don't know why they were doing things in a certain way, why they structured it in this way. You need to be able to personalize it because you need to know your own thought process from the time you are getting the pre-release information until you get into the exam venue. You need to know the thought process of how you are thinking, man. So templates are supposed to be according to your needs and also the things that you are putting personally inside the file, right? And I always say that you always need to make the file your friend. So today we are going to personalize the APC file together. But also one thing that I need to caution you on, I try to look for shortcuts in APC. I try to have a structure to say, okay, this is my approach. I need to do this, I need to do that. And every single time, the approach didn't work because the case studies were different and the industries were not the same. And I had to adjust, right? So the moral of the story is, guys, there is no shortcut to APC. I try to look for shortcuts. I try to look for templates. There's no template that will help you. You need to be able to apply professional judgment and be able to apply critical thinking. I think at this point you are at that level because you have passed, the board course, and now you're facing the December APC. So just make sure that you are trusting in the knowledge that you have and you're not really relying on templates too much. It's all about here and not about the template. So let's get into it. I have my file in front of me. Remember in the first APC preparation video, this is the file. My file was this thick. When I entered the exam venue, it was literally this thick. And yeah, no shame. It worked. But in the thickness, I knew everything that was in the file. I knew what was in which sections because of the flags, right? And today we're not going to go through the flags because that was in part 1 of the APC file. Today we're going to go through what cheat sheets I had in my file. And the first section I had in my cheat sheet was blank. I had a section called blank paper. Now, the section that's called blank paper, I literally put blank exam sheets, right? Maybe just 10 because number one, yes, we are typing, but then sometimes, when you're doing a calculation, you want to write down your thoughts because you have a calculator, right? So you're not using Excel. Sometimes I like to use the calculator because I was old school. So just write down my thoughts. Even if I'm reading the information of the day, I'll write down my thoughts on that piece of paper because I don't know what's going to happen on the day. I don't know how my mind is going to be, like what's going to shake me in that information of the day that's going to require me to write something down. So I always made sure that I had blank pieces of paper in my file. So let's get into the cheat sheets now. I had a file, one of the file dividers now was specifically for overall themes. So this is for a theme that affected all disciplines like accounting, auditing, finance, taxation, right? And the only thing I had in there was a liquidity issue. And the reason why I had this was because I remember the first case study we got on the APT board course, right? We had the background information of the company, we had the financial statements, and then we had the documents, like the general standard. But then this entity was going through liquidity issues. This entity was making a loss. They were not profitable. And in the financial statements, they had disclosed a deferred tax asset. There was goodwill, so there was a group of companies. And all of a sudden, when we got the information of the day, now they are discuss the goodwill must be, there was a goodwill impairment calculation, and then we were discussing whether the deferred tax asset, it was according to IAS 12, the disclosure of it, and I'm like, what's going on? And I didn't even prepare for that because in my mind, I'm like, okay, I need to focus only on triggers that are from documents onwards, the emails. And I didn't know that I have to have a holistic picture. So that question traumatized me. And this is why I have this in my file. So that I'm able to, if maybe it comes out, I'm able to answer it. So that's when I decided that I need to have cheat sheets according to what my weaknesses are. If I know my weakness is this specific question, I need to have it in my file. I need to include WACC because clearly I'm not going to remember the formula, right? But we'll get into that. So just make sure that whatever cheat sheet you have, it's based on what you are weak at. And it's going to serve as a reminder to you just in case it comes out. So I had this overall theme in terms of liquidity. And then I wrote down the recommendations of when a business is under financial distress, what they need to do. And then I also had the accounting aspect of it because that was the finance aspect of it. The accounting aspect was for deferred tax asset, when do you recognize the deferred tax asset? What IAS 12 basically says with regards to that, an entity that is under financial distress. And then with regards to goodwill, when do you impair goodwill? When do you test for impairment if it's a group of companies and all of that? And then I also had the taxation aspect of it, right? Because obviously I failed that question and I knew that once beaten, I can't be beaten by the same thing twice. I knew that I had to include it in my file. And also, this is purely based on my notes in CTA. So I had to go back to my accounting notes and my finance, obviously all the disciplines, the notes on that, and I had to compile a cheat sheet based on what the CTA note says. So it's not new information to you. It's something you learned when you were doing CTA. So I just brought back the information and pulled it together and put it in like one document back to front. And I just summarized everything. And then for accounting, the cheat sheet that I had for accounting, right? I only had 2 cheat sheets because there were only 2 sections that just gave me a headache. And number 1, deferred tax. I knew deferred tax is always going to be triggered because remember, when you're in APC, you need to think multidisciplinary. It's not only just accounting. It's going to be what's the impact on accounting, taxation, finance, and auditing. That's how we were taught, right? So I knew deferred tax affected accounting as well as taxation. So just in case they asked me the deferred tax, implications, I had that in my file. And like I said, it's nothing new. It's based on what I was taught in CTA. So I had to summarize my study notes for deferred tax as well as what IAS 12 says and put it in this file. So it wasn't like a thick document. It just had the basic principles of deferred tax. And then the second thing I had was leases. Leases gem, somehow, it snuck into the paper. Like from pre-release, it will be triggered. So I knew that leases, like if it came in the pre-release, it's coming out. It's not going to change. So I basically had the summary of what IFRS 16 says, and it's based on the structure that I suggested in my previous videos with regards to accounting, whereas you're going to have the classification, which is what makes this standard applicable. It needs to have a criteria. What criteria has to be met before we can apply that standard? And then number 2, initial recognition and measurement, then subsequent measurement, and then presentation and disclosure. So I had the IFRS 16 notes according to that standard. Like I said, nothing new is according to CTA notes. And that's the only thing that I had for accounting. And funny enough, for accounting, I did not have revenue unless it was explicitly triggered. So yeah, because revenue is like a long standard. So I can't just have a summary of that. Even the summary won't be a summary. It'll just be a lengthy thing, just increasing the thickness of the file. So I actually worked on IFRS 15 if it was explicitly triggered. And then moving on to finance, I think finance was the one that had most of the cheat sheets, right? The first cheat sheet I had was an Excel cheat sheet, right? So obviously when you are doing an Excel calculation, you have the function, that fx thing, right? Obviously if it's an if statement, you're going to select if and all of that. And if it's NPV, then you must select NPV and then input certain things. But then you're not going to remember like the rules of Excel. So I had to write them down. So I knew that if I'm calculating PMT, then this is what I need to input. And especially when it comes to how to determine the rate for that period, right? Obviously, if it's monthly, quarterly, the rules are different. So I had to familiarize myself with that in terms of Excel because I'm used to the financial calculator, but I wasn't used to inputting all of that information on the Excel itself. So I had to have the rules. So I had the formulas for PMT, NPV, IRR, PV, as well as the FV, right? And then I listed exactly what you need to input step by step using the fx function. So that was the cheat sheet that I have for in terms of the Excel cheat sheets for finance. And then the next cheat sheet I had was an explanation of why WACC would be appropriate to use, right? Because sometimes we are very quick to calculate something, but we don't know the reason why we need to calculate it. So the why was very important because sometimes you're going to get an NPV calculation, or maybe you are doing capital budget evaluations or whatever, and they didn't use WACC. So you need to like assess the reasonability of the rate that they used, and we need to actually state why it's important to use WACC instead, right? So I actually had reasons for that, and just like I mentioned earlier, it's from CTA notes. If you don't have access to your CTA notes, use the AI tool, guys. The AI tool, go on the AI tool and ask when would WACC be appropriate to use and in which industry. Like, just be creative with it, right? Just state when will WACC be used and when is it relevant, why is it relevant. And then you need to also, I also had a note for when to use cost of debt and when to use cost of equity, because sometimes if maybe a company is debt driven, or maybe they were trying to focus on equity to reduce the risk, then we need to understand why we need to use the cost of equity or why we need to use the cost of debt, right? And in which situation. So ask the AI tool those questions. When do you use WACC? When do you use the cost of debt? When do you use the cost of equity? And you can come up with the study notes yourself, right? So that's exactly what I did. And then after understanding why you use WACC, obviously, I had to include the calculation of WACC. I had to include the different types of cost of debts, the different types of cost of equity, and then also how to calculate that weighted average of, the WACC itself. And I had the different, your debentures, your shares, and all of that, your bonds. I had the formulas for that. And then I had that little table of the weighted average calculation. Because chances are I would have forgotten if maybe it was explicitly triggered and I missed it in pre-release. So this would have given me a chance to just remind myself very quickly on the day and then answer the task on the day. So that's what I had for WACC. And then the next thing I had was capital budgeting, right? Obviously that was a bit thick-ish, but not more than 5 pages, please. Not more than 5 pages, meaning 5 pages back to back. As in, you have 3 pages, ne? A full page, and then just 1 page that doesn't have a back. Or maybe we can stretch it to 6 pages, right? So you have 3 pages back to back. And I'm saying that you can't have like a thick, section, because obviously you won't have time to go through that in the exam. Like, you can't be sifting through study notes of capital budgeting because it's supposed to be here, right? And this is just you reminding yourself what a capital budget looks like. But like with WACC, you can't go into calculation before you understand what a capital budget is. So here I had the questions of what is the purpose of a capital budget and when is it used, right? And then the second thing I had was the different methods of capital budgeting and why they're used. So the first one, for example, the payback period. I had the purpose of when you use the payback period as well as the calculation for it, an example. And then I moved to the next method. So every method would have a structure of what is the purpose of that method and then have the calculation and the template of that thing. And obviously, the method that we always use is the MPV method. So obviously, I had a template of the MPV method. I also stated like what to look out for, your opportunity cost, your safe costs, your sunk cost needs to be ignored. I had it in bold. Depreciation, ignore, I had it in bold, right? So just have like little notes to remind you that this is supposed to be there, this is not supposed to be there. Like if maybe they're selling an equipment at the beginning or at the end of the year, then you have to also note that, okay, remember that we need to sell the equipment at the end and reflect it also with the tax, right? The tax implications where we have CGT and recoupment and all of that. So the little things that you know are going to be in the capital budget, then you include them in the template so that in case they say that you need to draft a capital budget, you already know that these are the things you need to look out for. Because on the day of the exam, Shem, this is going to save you a whole lot of time. And then we move to valuations, the tricky one. Valuations used to traumatize me in CTA. And like it was deep for me because I didn't understand it. But now when I was doing APC, I had to force myself to understand it because listen, it traumatized me and history repeated itself, and like they kept on testing it on the board course, and I'm just like, girl, you need to fix your life. And that's when I actually sat down and understood when to actually perform a valuation and why it's actually performed, right? So the same structure as the capital budget, you need to understand when you are doing a valuation and why do you need to do a valuation, the importance of it. And then after, you need to look at the different valuation methods. So you're going to look at the purpose of that method and then have the calculation and the template underneath it. So that you know, okay, this method is used in this situation. Or maybe if you're in the retail industry, this is the method that you need to use because it's relevant and it's going to give you like the accuracy, man, of the data that you're looking for, right? And then obviously I focused on the method that like traumatized me even more. The discounted cash flow method, right? Or the free cash flow method. I sat down with that method of valuations until I understood it. I had a template, and that template, obviously, it came from my CTA notes in varsity. It didn't come from anywhere else because that's the only thing that I know. And I had to summarize it, and basically it helped me because I knew if in the information of the day they are saying, here is a valuation, please assess it and analyze it and tell us, critically analyze it and tell us what is wrong. Because you know, if someone says you need to critically evaluate, you need to look at what is correct, what is incorrect, and what is missing. The three things that I discussed in the previous video. And I can't critically evaluate something if I don't know what goes in it. So obviously I had to remind myself. And valuation is such a big topic for you not to even go through everything and actually write the summaries down so that you can remember. So just make sure that you have this in your file because listen, it saved me. And then after looking at the valuations, right, I had general qualitative considerations. So remember I did a video on strategic considerations using the SAFE method as well as the other things that I discussed in that video. And I had to do one specifically for valuations from the perspective of, let's say, the valuer or the buyer and the seller, right? It's two different perspectives. So if maybe we are valuing the company and we want to sell it, or maybe a division and we want to sell that division, or maybe buy another company, we need to know both perspectives of the buyer and the seller, because on the information of the day, we don't know which part we are going to be playing. So I just had to actually have a qualitative considerations for both parties just in case. And then also the qualitative considerations for acquiring maybe another division or another entity or whatever. It's the same thing really. And that is important because sometimes you're going to think, what must I write? Qualitative considerations, and it's blank. If you have it in your file, then surely you can tweak the things here and there, but just make sure that you are making the qualitative considerations relevant to the case study. Don't just theory dump, because if you're theory dumping, then they're going to see, hooray, you're just trying to force something. You're going to try to force a triangle into a square, and baby, it's not going to fit. It's really not going to fit. So just make sure that you are applying yourself in the case study, you're applying professional judgment so that you can be able to answer it at that C level. And then the next thing I had a cheat sheet on is break even. That's another thing that just created a hurricane when I was doing the APT board course. So there was a case study that we received, and in pre-release, I do not think that it's a break even point calculation or I'm even supposed to consider BEP. It flew over my head. Come IOD, it was triggered, but I did not remember how BEP is calculated. I did not remember how, like, what to even consider, what goes in it. So I realized that that's one thing that I need to have in the file, just in case I don't remember the calculation. Then I have it here, and obviously, just like for capital budgeting and valuations, you need to know when is BEP calculated. You need to know why it's calculated, the pros and cons. And then after that, you can have the calculation just to remind you the formula and what goes in it. Because if you do not understand when it is calculated, then how will you know that you're supposed to use it? It's the same principle applies. You always need to ask yourself, why am I supposed to calculate this thing? Or why am I supposed to use the specific method? And then the next thing that was a cheat sheet was risk and return. So you know how in CTA we had the risk and return section where we are discussing what is the difference between equity, what is the difference between debt and equity and all of that, discussing the pros and cons, you know, the risks of everything and when to actually consider debt, when to actually consider equity. Yeah, I had this in the file because I remember there was a time when they asked for my advice in a case study about funding. They asked, which funding method do you think we should go with? And I remember like, yo, in CTA I did this. If it was CTA or ITC, I would have answered this because I studied it. But now, because I didn't prepare for it in the pre-release, I wasn't able to answer to the best of my ability, right? So I realized that, okay, I need to include this in my file just in case there's a which funding must we use type of question. Then I know it is in the file just in case, right? This was just a just in case thing. Because remember, I said you must have cheat sheets according to your weaknesses. And this was my weakness. And I knew that I'm going to forget it. So therefore, I need to include it in the file. And that was all with regards to the finance. But there's many people like myself who have problems with other topics. If you want to include it in your file, you can. But I suggest that only include things that are explicitly triggered, because now my file is already thick. Imagine I already included other things. It was going to be even thicker and just give me a headache. So it's about comfortability. If you feel like there's another topic that you need to consider in the cheat sheets like ABC or transfer pricing or something else, then include it just for, comfort, like a safety net. Just in case you miss it in pre-release, then, if it comes out, you have the formula, you have the thought process, and you have everything. So it's going to be easier for you to actually just remind yourself very quickly on the day and then write down your thought process according to what the IOD is stating, right? So just remember, it doesn't matter what you have in your file if you don't relate it to the case study on the day. So just make sure that you are creating that relationship. You are marrying pre-release to the IOD so that you can be at that C level. Then when it comes to taxation wasn't really long. The first cheat sheet I had was VAT implications, right? A summary of the VAT implications for, the CTA notes that I had for VAT, I summarized them because I didn't know what's going to come out. But then obviously looking at the pre-release, I had an idea of obviously the line items in the financial statements, as well as the transactions that we are going into as a company according to the emails we are receiving. So I will be able to look at the VAT implications, because remember in APC when they say we want the tax implications, it's income tax implications as well as VAT implications. So I knew that VAT will always be triggered if they want the tax implications. So I knew that I had to include that in my file. Then the second thing I included was an example of the taxable income. You see the structure that they had. This is the CTA structure that they gave us in varsity, right? Where you have your gross income, your dividends, and then the total gross income, then you have your deductions and all of that, right? Your capital allowances, everything that's just deducted to get to your taxable income towards the end. I had that structure so that I can remind myself, okay, what goes into this calculation. And then the next one I had was interest, right? So your section 24J, I had to summarize it, because if there was interest involved, I knew section 24J would be triggered. But then sometimes they would test it, sometimes they wouldn't test it. But then obviously if they're asking for tax implications and there's interest, I would have to know it. That's a very long standard. Well, tax section. Sorry, the tax section. So I summarized it as well as have the formula, because as much as it's in the tax legislation, it's nicer to rewrite something so that you can remember it very easily. I think my brain works like that. If I can type it out or if I can write it out, then I remember it better. And then the next cheat sheet I had was capital allowances, right? So all the capital allowances in the tax legislation, I summarized them because I knew that, okay, if it's wear and tear, then here is wear and tear. I don't have to open the tax leg. I don't have to go to section 11E and, try to figure out what is written there. No, I already rewrote it on this piece of paper and I summarized it. So that is basically what I had for taxation. And then the last thing I had was CGT for taxation, right? Obviously CGT is a long section, but it was just the basics of CGT. Not everything, not your personal, if you're an individual, these are rules. If you're a spouse, married, no. I had the basics of CGT according to the CTA notes. And that's all that you have to actually include in your file, unless it is explicitly triggered in the pre-release. And then lastly is auditing. So with auditing, this is a very short section, because I think with auditing, the auditing video that I uploaded the other day, it speaks more about how to actually prepare for an auditing trigger, and most of the work you would have done based on what is explicitly triggered in the pre-release. So the general cheat sheets that you can have for auditing is just reminding yourself of the assertions. So just have like a table of the assertions for class of transactions, the assertions for account balances, and the definition. Because there's no use you haven't cut off, and then on the day you have a blank page and then you can't remember what cutoff is, right? At least have the definition so you can remind yourself, And then the next thing I had was the assessment, the risk assessment of ROM. You see the risk of material misstatement. I had an assessment, right? So the assessment is a full assessment, and it basically shows you like how to actually assess a risk. So the columns would be the account, which is maybe example PPE or maybe investment property, and then it deals with the assertions affected, the risk of material misstatement rating, where it's going to be either high, moderate, or low, and then the justification of why it's high, moderate, or low, right? So it is an example of how you need to assess that risk. And like I mentioned, this is from the CTA notes, but then with the risk assessment of the risk of material misstatements, right? That assessment is from a past paper on the SAICA website. So I forgot which year where they asked for an assessment of ROM for the specific line item was investment property, and they had the candidates of that year had to perform this assessment, and then it showed me what they want from a C perspective, right? So I knew that I had to include certain information to be rated at a C. So I basically created a template for myself based on that answering that candidate's response, and I created a template in a table format where I knew that I need to include these certain things in my response to be at a C level. So I don't know which section in auditing you are struggling with, but maybe you can look at a past paper to see, okay, if maybe they're asking for an assessment of something or an analysis of something, this is how they want you to respond. And then you can create a template according to that, right? So like I said, templates about personalizing what you want in your file. Your file has to be your friend. Your file has to be the one that guides you, on the day of the exam. And that is exactly how I structured mine. So yeah, that's basically what I included in the cheat sheets. And the last thing I included for auditing was just general audit procedures for the assertions. And this is something that you can also ask the AI tool. You can ask the AI tool, what are the general procedures for accuracy, completeness, all of that. But obviously when you get the information on the day or the pre-release, you need to personalize it according to the information you're getting, because the procedures can't be like generalized. You need to specify it according to the information you were receiving in pre-release and the one you received in the IOD. So you need to make sure that you are applying professional judgment to see which procedures are going to be relevant. And yeah, that's basically what I included in my APC file, and these are the cheat sheets that I had. So now it's about creating your own cheat sheets. Use the CTA notes that you have. Go back to the study notes you created. Go back to the things that you were receiving from your lecturers at your university. If you have to brush up on certain things, you can brush up on them and include them in the file. But please try to keep like a topic not more than 4 pages maximum, unless it's a valuations calculation. Then yes, we can keep it maybe to 5, but remember 5 means it is 2 pages that are full and 1 that is just half, right? It's not a back-to-back. That one is not back-to-back. So just make sure that you're not making your file too thick. And in you creating cheat sheets, please flag them so you know which cheat sheets is which and where to find everything, because that is very important. There's no use having a thick file and not knowing where everything is in that file. So yes, we have reached the end of our episode, and I hope this answers your question on how my APC file looked like when it comes to the cheat sheets. And I hope you're able to be covered with regards to what needs to go into your file. But just remember, obviously you won't have the same cheat sheets as me. You need to have cheat sheets according to what you are weak at and what you think you need support with, right? What is going to be most valuable to you going into the exam. So just make sure that you are looking at your CTA notes and you are able to identify what can help you in the exam should it come out. So I think the one question you should ask yourself is, if this topic were to come out, am I going to be able to answer it on the day? And am I going to be able to apply myself on the day without having that cheat sheet? If the answer is no, summarize the topic in one page and put it in your file. But just make sure that it is relevant to the pre-release if you are seeing signs of this topic coming out, right? So just make sure that you are covered in that aspect. And yes, we have reached the end of our episode, and I hope you enjoy your day.